Take a deep breath, and let's hear a story about Gaby, a kind-hearted pharmacist who found her true calling. The soft morning light filtered through the leaves of the old oak tree that stood outside Gaby's cottage, casting dappled shadows across her wooden porch. Inside, the air was filled with the gentle aroma of lavender and chamomile, their calming scents wafting from small glass bottles meticulously arranged on handcrafted shelves. Gaby moved with graceful purpose between her kitchen and her work area, her long chestnut hair tied back in a loose braid that swayed with each step she took. Her home was nestled at the edge of a vast forest, a perfect location for someone whose life revolved around the healing bounty of nature. As a pharmacist by profession, Gaby had always been fascinated by the science of healing, but her true passion lay in the ancient wisdom of plant medicine. Her small pharmacy in town was well respected, but it was in her home laboratory where she truly came alive, crafting essential oils and tinctures from the plants she lovingly cultivated in her garden. Her fingers were always slightly stained with earth and plant essences, a badge of honor she wore proudly as she worked. The local townsfolk often sought her advice not just for conventional medicines, but for her natural remedies that seemed to carry something special. Perhaps it was simply the care with which she prepared them. Every morning, Gaby would wake with the sun and spend time in her garden, greeting each plant as if it were an old friend. Today was no different as she knelt in the soft soil, feeling its cool dampness against her knees, while gently harvesting fresh peppermint leaves for a new oil she was developing. Birds sang their morning chorus above her, their melodic tunes creating a natural symphony that made her heart swell with gratitude. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the clean forest air, feeling completely at peace in this moment of connection with the world around her. Gaby's cottage was filled with books, ancient herbals passed down through generations, modern pharmacological texts, and journals filled with her own careful observations and recipes. The walls were adorned with dried herbs hanging in neat bundles, filling the air with their subtle, earthy fragrance that changed with the seasons and the gentle drafts that wandered through the open windows. Her cat, Sage, a gentle gray tabby with knowing green eyes, was her constant companion, often curling up on the windowsill to watch her work. Together they lived in a rhythm dictated by nature's cycles, observing the changing seasons and adapting their daily routines accordingly. The boundary between Gaby's garden and the forest beyond was deliberately blurred. She had planted native species that created a gradual transition from cultivated to wild. This transitional space attracted all manner of wildlife. Deer would cautiously approach at dusk, rabbits made homes under the berry bushes, and a family of raccoons regularly visited the small pond she had created. Gaby cherished these animal visitors, seeing them as reminders of the interconnectedness of all living things. She would often sit silently on her porch in the evening, watching their comings and goings, learning from their behaviors, and feeling a deep sense of belonging to this natural community. The townspeople knew Gaby as both a skilled professional and a somewhat mysterious figure who lived between two worlds, the scientific and the natural. Children would sometimes follow her through town as she made her way to her pharmacy, fascinated by the stories they had heard about the plant lady who could talk to animals. In truth, while Gaby couldn't literally speak with animals, she did possess an unusual empathy for them, a quietness of spirit that put even the shyest creatures at ease. Her gentle nature and patient demeanor made her approachable to both people and animals alike, creating a bridge between the human community and the natural world. Gaby's pharmacy was unlike any other in the region. While it contained all the standard medications one would expect, it also featured a special section dedicated to her natural remedies. The walls were painted a soft green, and plants grew in every corner, creating an atmosphere more reminiscent of a greenhouse than a clinical space. Customers often commented that just stepping inside made them feel better, enveloped by the comforting scents and the visual beauty of living things. Gaby believed strongly that healing environments were as important as medicines themselves, and she had created a space that reflected this philosophy. Behind the pharmacy, in a small private room, Gaby conducted consultations with those seeking more personalized advice. Here, she would listen intently as people described their ailments, observing not just their symptoms but the way they held themselves, the tone of their voice, the look in their eyes. Her approach was holistic, treating the whole person rather than just the disease. She would often prescribe conventional medications alongside natural remedies, believing that both had their place in the healing process. Her patients trusted her implicitly, often saying there was something in her calm presence that was healing in itself. On weekends, Gaby would venture deeper into the forest, basket in hand, to forage for wild plants that couldn't be cultivated in her garden. These expeditions were opportunities for quiet reflection, the soft crunching of leaves beneath her boots, and the distant calls of birds the only sounds accompanying her thoughts. She knew the forest intimately, which slopes would yield the first morels in spring, where the wild ginger grew thick in summer, which sunny clearings would burst with echinacea in the fall. Each plant had its season, its purpose, its unique gift to offer, and Gaby approached her harvesting with reverence and restraint, taking only what she needed and always thanking the plants for their generosity. The changing seasons brought different rhythms to Gaby's life, each with its own tasks and pleasures. Spring was for planting and watching new life emerge. Summer for abundant harvesting and drying herbs in the hot sun. Autumn for gathering nuts and roots. And winter for studying and creating complex preparations from her stored materials. In the depths of winter, when snow blanketed the forest and garden, Gaby would spend long evenings by her fireplace, sage purring on her lap, reading old herbals and making notes for experiments she would try in the coming spring. These quiet winter nights held their own special magic, a time of rest and planning, of dreams and possibilities. Gaby's kitchen was the heart of her home, where dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams and shelves were lined with jars of homemade preserves and tinctures. The old wooden table in the center bore the marks of years of work cutting herbs, preparing meals, writing in journals, sharing tea with friends. It was at this table that she did some of her best thinking, working through complex formulations, or simply sitting in contemplative silence, watching the birds at the feeder outside her window. The kitchen was always warm, with something simmering gently on the stove, a healing broth, a new essential oil blend, or simply a pot of herbal tea infusing the air with its aromatic goodness. Though she spent much time alone, Gaby was not a solitary person by nature. She had deep connections with a small circle of friends, other healers, herbalists, and nature enthusiasts who shared her reverence for the natural world. Once a month, they would gather at one another's homes to share knowledge, exchange plants and seeds, and simply enjoy the comfort of like-minded company. These gatherings were filled with laughter, stories, and the kind of deep conversations that nourish the soul. Gaby cherished these friendships, seeing in them a reflection of the interconnectedness she observed in the natural communities around her. In early autumn, when the maples were just beginning to show hints of gold and crimson at their edges, Gaby had established a tradition of hosting an open house at her cottage. The entire town was invited to walk through her gardens, learn about the plants she grew, and sample teas and tinctures. It was her way of sharing her knowledge and passion with the broader community. And each year more people attended, drawn by curious interest or personal recommendations. Children were especially welcome, and Gaby took particular delight in introducing them to the wonders of the plant world, watching their eyes widen as they tasted honey from her beehives or crushed a leaf of lemon balm between their fingers to release its bright, citrusy scent. Today had been like many others in Gaby's peaceful life, a morning in the garden, an afternoon at the pharmacy, and now an evening walk along the forest path that led from her cottage to a small meadow she particularly loved. The day was winding down, the sun casting long golden rays through the trees, illuminating dust motes and insects that danced in its light. Gaby walked slowly, breathing deeply, allowing the transition from day to evening to wash over her like a gentle wave. Her mind was already turning to the evening ahead. A simple dinner, some reading by lamplight, perhaps working on a new formulation she had been considering. She had no way of knowing that this familiar path would lead her to an encounter that would change the rhythms of her life in unexpected ways. The gravel crunched softly beneath Gaby's boots as she rounded the bend in the road that would take her back toward her cottage. The evening air was growing cooler, carrying the rich scent of damp earth and pine needles that always made her feel at home. Suddenly, an unusual sound caught her attention, a low, pained moan coming from the ditch at the side of the road. Gaby stopped, every sense alert, her eyes scanning the gathering shadows for the source. There, partially hidden by tall grasses, lay a large form that didn't belong to the landscape, its dark shape contrasting with the golden evening light. Drawing closer with cautious steps, her heart quickened as she realized what she was seeing, a young moose, lying on its side, breathing heavily, with what appeared to be a deep gash on its hind leg. For a moment, Gaby stood perfectly still, her mind racing with possibilities and concerns. The moose's large, liquid eyes followed her movements, revealing fear but also exhaustion that prevented it from attempting to flee. She could see it was a young male, perhaps only a year or two old, not yet fully grown but still massive compared to her human frame. The wound on its leg looked angry and raw, likely caused by barbed wire from the nearby farm fence. Speaking in soft, low tones more to calm herself than the animal, Gaby slowly knelt at a safe distance, assessing the situation with her trained eye. The moose needed help, that much was clear, but approaching such a large wild animal, even an injured one, presented significant dangers. Drawing on her deep knowledge of animal behavior, Gaby began to sing softly, a wordless melody that rose and fell like gentle waves on a shore. She had found over years of working with wild creatures that music could bridge the gap between species, creating a sense of calm that transcended language. As she sang, she slowly removed her jacket and spread it on the ground beside her, then began unpacking the small pouch of essential oils she always carried. The familiar ritual of preparing her supplies helped steady her own nerves as she considered her next steps. The moose's breathing seemed to slow slightly as it listened to her voice, its enormous ears flicking toward the sound. The light was fading quickly now, and Gaby knew she needed to act before darkness made her task impossible. With deliberate movements, she took out her phone and called the only person she could think of who might help in this situation, Marcus, the local veterinarian who had become a friend over years of shared interest in wildlife rehabilitation. His gruff voice answered on the third ring, and within minutes of her explaining the situation, he promised to come with his truck and tranquilizer gun. "Don't approach it," he warned before hanging up. "Just keep it calm if you can." Gaby slipped the phone back into her pocket and continued her soft singing, watching as the moose's terrified breathing gradually steadied into a rhythm that matched her melody. While waiting for Marcus, Gaby prepared a blend of lavender and tea tree oils diluted in a carrier, known for their powerful antiseptic properties. The familiar scents centered her, connecting her to the countless times she had prepared similar remedies for injured animals that found their way to her garden, though never one as large or potentially dangerous as this moose. The golden evening light had faded to a soft blue twilight when headlights appeared around the bend, and Marcus's truck pulled up behind her car. He approached quietly, experienced eyes taking in the scene, nodding approval at the distance she had maintained. "Young bull," he murmured, preparing the tranquilizer dart with practiced hands. "Lucky you found him before infection set in or predators did." With the precision that came from years of wildlife work, Marcus administered the tranquilizer from a safe distance. The moose flinched slightly at the dart's impact, but was too weak to react further. As they waited for the drug to take effect, Gaby explained her plan to clean and treat the wound before moving the animal to somewhere safer to recover. Marcus listened skeptically, but didn't dismiss her ideas outright. He had seen enough of Gaby's successes with plant medicines to respect her approach. When the moose's eyes finally drooped and its massive head lowered to the ground, they approached cautiously, Marcus leading the way, his hand on Gaby's arm as a reminder to move slowly and stay alert despite the animal's sedated state. The wound was worse than it had appeared from a distance, a deep laceration that had torn through skin and muscle, narrowly missing major blood vessels. Working together in the beam of Marcus's powerful flashlight, they cleaned the area thoroughly, Gaby applying her antiseptic blend with gentle hands that betrayed none of the anxiety she felt inside. The moose's enormous size became even more apparent as they worked beside it, its shoulder nearly as tall as Gaby's waist, even as it lay on its side. "He can't stay here," Marcus said finally, straightening his back with a wince after bending over the wound for so long. "He's too vulnerable, and he'll panic when he wakes up on the roadside." Making a decision that she knew might be foolish but felt unquestionably right, Gaby suggested they bring the moose to her property. Behind her cottage was a small, unused shed with a fenced area that had once housed goats, secure enough to contain a recovering moose, and close enough for her to monitor and treat it regularly. Marcus's expression told her he thought the idea was mad, but years of friendship had taught him that once Gaby set her mind on helping an animal, there was little use in arguing. With the help of Marcus's truck, a makeshift ramp, and strength born of adrenaline and determination, they somehow managed to transport the sedated animal to Gaby's shed, settling it on a thick bed of clean straw just as the tranquilizer began to wear off. Over the next days, a routine emerged that revolved entirely around the care of the injured moose, whom Gaby had named Eldon, from an old word meaning elder tree that she had read in one of her herbals. Each morning at dawn, she would approach the shed carrying fresh water and a mixture of leaves, twigs, and fruits that her research suggested would appeal to a young moose. At first, Eldon would struggle to his feet defensively when she appeared, but as days passed, he began to merely watch her with those enormous liquid eyes, gradually accepting her presence as non-threatening. The wound required cleaning twice daily, and Gaby developed a blend of calendula, plantain, and yarrow that she applied carefully, speaking in soothing tones throughout the process. Progress was slow but steady, the angry red of the wound gradually fading to pink as new tissue formed. Gaby documented everything meticulously in her journal: the herbal preparations she used, Eldon's behaviors, his appetite, the way he would now allow her to approach within a few feet before showing signs of stress. She found herself spending hours simply sitting near the shed, reading or writing while Eldon grew accustomed to her presence. Occasionally, she would sing the same wordless melody from that first night, noticing how the moose's ears would turn toward her voice, his eyes growing heavy as if the sound itself carried healing properties. These quiet moments became precious to her, windows into a different way of being, of communicating across the divide between human and wild. Marcus visited regularly to check on the patient's progress, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to grudging admiration for both Gaby's dedication and the effectiveness of her treatments. "I wouldn't have given him great odds," he admitted one evening as they watched Eldon cautiously testing his weight on the healing leg. Between the injury itself and the stress of captivity, these cases often don't end well. Gaby nodded, understanding what remained unspoken, that the conventional approach would likely have been euthanasia rather than the intensive care she had undertaken. There was professional validation in Marcus's words, but more meaningful to her was the simple fact of Eldon's improving condition, the growing alertness in his eyes, the increasing confidence in his movements. As weeks passed and autumn deepened around them, bringing cooler nights and spectacular colors to the forest beyond her garden, Gaby began to face the reality that her time with Eldon was limited. The wound had healed remarkably well, leaving a scar but no signs of lasting damage to his mobility. His strength was returning, evident in the restless way he now paced the small enclosure, his eyes increasingly fixed on the distant trees visible beyond her garden. One morning, as she approached with his food, she found him standing tall, his magnificent head held high, looking more like the wild creature he was meant to be than the frightened, injured animal she had found by the roadside. In that moment, despite the connection she had grown to treasure, Gaby knew it was nearly time to return him to his rightful home. The decision to release Eldon brought a mixture of emotions: joy at his recovery, pride in the success of her care, but also a surprising sense of loss at the thought of no longer sharing her days with this quiet presence that had become such a part of her life. She discussed the plan with Marcus, who advised waiting for a clear, calm day and transporting Eldon deep into the forest, far from roads and human habitation. "He's young," Marcus explained as they finalized details. "He'll likely find a herd to join, or at least territory where he can establish himself safely." Gaby nodded, trusting his expertise, but wishing there was some way to know for certain what would become of Eldon once he disappeared among the trees. The rational part of her understood this was the natural order, the right ending to their time together, but another part of her, the part that had sat for countless hours in quiet communion with this wild being, ached at the impending separation. On the morning chosen for Eldon's release, Gaby rose before dawn and prepared herself through the familiar rituals that centered her spirit-steeping herbs for tea, lighting a candle, sitting in quiet meditation as she watched light gradually illuminate her garden. She had barely slept, her mind filled with concerns about the day ahead, yet she felt a profound clarity about what needed to be done. With deliberate care, she prepared a final treatment for Eldon's now healed wound, infusing it with her intentions for his future health and safety. When Marcus arrived with his truck just after sunrise, they worked in wordless harmony, their movements synchronized by weeks of collaboration. Using a mild sedative to keep Eldon calm during transport, they carefully guided him into the specially prepared trailer, Marcus's expertise making the process smoother than Gaby had dared hope. The drive into the heart of the forest took nearly an hour, following logging roads that grew progressively rougher until they reached a clearing beside a stream that Marcus knew well from previous wildlife releases. It was perfect, sheltered with access to water, good browsing, and most importantly, far from human interference. As they opened the trailer door and waited for Eldon to emerge, Gaby felt tears welling in her eyes, unexpected but unstoppable. When the moose finally stepped cautiously onto the forest floor, his nostrils flaring as he took in the sense of his natural habitat, she whispered words of farewell too softly for even Marcus to hear. They were for Eldon, a lone gratitude for what he had taught her, hopes for his future, a promise to carry the memory of their connection always. For several minutes, Eldon remained near the trailer, as if uncertain what to make of his sudden freedom after weeks in captivity. His great head swung from side to side, scenting the air, ears pivoting to catch every sound of the forest around them. Then, with a suddenness that caught Gaby by surprise, he took several bounding steps into the trees, stopped to look back once directly at her. She was certain and continued at a steady pace until the shadows of the forest swallowed his form completely. The emptiness that flooded Gaby in that moment was overwhelming, a physical sensation of loss that caught in her throat. Beside her, Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, understanding without words what this moment meant to her. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the spot where Eldon had disappeared, before finally turning back to the truck for the journey home. In the days following Eldon's release, Gaby found herself drawn repeatedly to the empty shed, standing in the doorway and remembering the weeks of care, the gradual building of trust, the quiet moments of connection that had filled her autumn. The space seemed impossibly vacant now, though she had cleaned it thoroughly and stored away the supplies that had been so central to her daily routine. Each morning, she would wake with a momentary expectation of needing to prepare Eldon's treatments before remembering that he was where he belonged, wild and free, no longer dependent on her care. These moments brought a bittersweet ache, but beneath it was a deep satisfaction, a sense of having participated in something meaningful that extended beyond her own life into the greater rhythms of the natural world. A week after the release, Marcus stopped by with his camera to show Gaby photographs from a wildlife monitoring station deep in the forest. Among the images of various creatures going about their lives, deer, foxes, raccoons was one that made her breath catch, a young bull moose with a distinctive scar on his hind leg, moving confidently through a stand of birch trees. "Thought you'd want to see this," Marcus said with a gentle smile, understanding what the confirmation of Eldon's successful return to the wild would mean to her. Gaby studied the image with tears in her eyes, noticing how healthy he looked, how much more at home in that setting than he had ever appeared in her makeshift enclosure despite her best efforts to make him comfortable. The knowledge that Eldon was thriving brought a sense of closure that allowed Gaby to fully return to her own rhythms. Her garden needed attention after weeks of divided focus, and her pharmacy customers had been patient but would welcome her full presence again. Yet something had shifted within her during her time with Eldon, a deepening of her already profound connection to the natural world. She found herself more attuned to the subtle languages of the animals that visited her garden, more aware of the intricate web of relationships that sustained the forest beyond her property. Her work with essential oils and plant medicines took on new dimensions as she incorporated what she had learned during Eldon's treatment, her journal filling with observations and ideas for preparations specifically designed for wildlife care. Winter arrived with its blanket of pristine snow, transforming Gaby's cottage and the surrounding forest into a wonderland of white that glittered in the weak sunlight. On a clear December morning, she set out on snowshoes to collect pine needles for a seasonal oil she was developing, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air, her steps leaving a trail of perfect impressions across the untouched snow. The forest was hushed around her, the usual sounds muffled by the snow-laden branches overhead, creating a sacred silence that invited contemplation. As she worked, carefully selecting the freshest needles and placing them in her basket, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for this life she had created, for the knowledge passed down through generations that allowed her to work in partnership with nature, rather than apart from it. The short winter day was beginning to wane when Gaby started back toward her cottage, taking a different path that led past a small frozen pond. As she approached the clearing, she slowed her steps, sensing rather than seeing a presence among the trees at the pond's edge. There, half hidden by the shadows of the forest, stood a small group of moose, 3 females with a younger animal that appeared to be last spring's calf, and slightly apart, a young bull whose stance and silhouette struck a chord of recognition deep within her. Though she was too far away to see details clearly, something in her heart knew with certainty that she was looking at Eldon, now part of a family group, his place in the natural order restored. For a long moment, she stood perfectly still, not wanting to disturb the peaceful scene, simply witnessing this confirmation of life's capacity for healing and renewal. Whether by chance or some deeper awareness, the bull moose turned his head in her direction, ears forward, gaze steady across the expanse of snow between them. Gaby didn't move, barely breathed, allowing this moment of recognition, if that's truly what it was, to unfold without interference. There was no way to know if Eldon remembered her, if he associated her scent or form with the care he had received, but in that moment of connection across species and experience, such questions seemed unimportant. What mattered was the simple fact of his presence there, healthy and whole, living the life he was meant to live. After what felt like an eternity but was likely only seconds, he turned away, rejoining the small herd as they moved gracefully into the deeper forest, leaving only tracks in the snow as evidence of their passing. The walk back to her cottage was filled with a peace that seemed to radiate from within, warming Gaby despite the falling temperature as twilight deepened around her. The encounter felt like a gift, an affirmation of the path she had chosen and the values that guided her work. By the time she reached her garden gate, stars were beginning to appear in the clear sky above, their distant light creating a canopy of diamond-like brilliance that took her breath away. Standing for a moment before entering her home, Gaby breathed deeply of the cold, pine-scented air, feeling a profound connection to this place, to the forest beyond, to the intricate web of life of which she was just one small part. In helping Eldon heal, she had been reminded of the resilience inherent in all living things, the capacity for recovery that existed when one worked in harmony with natural processes rather than against them. As winter deepened and holidays approached, Gaby found herself sharing the story of Eldon with close friends gathered around her table for a celebratory meal. Her telling was thoughtful, emphasizing not her own role, but the remarkable healing capacity of both the herbal remedies she had used and the moose's own vital force. Around the table, faces glowed in candlelight as they listened, occasionally asking questions or expressing amazement at certain details. What struck Gaby as she spoke was how the experience had affected not just Eldon but herself, how it had expanded her understanding of healing to encompass not just the body but the spirit, not just the individual but the community, both human and wild. In caring for this wild creature and ultimately releasing him, she had participated in a form of healing that rippled outward, touching all involved in ways that continued to unfold. Marcus, who had been somewhat quiet during the storytelling, finally spoke up as Gaby concluded her tale with a description of seeing Eldon in the forest with his new herd. "I've worked with wildlife all my life," he said, his usually gruff voice softened by emotion and perhaps the glass of wine he had enjoyed with dinner. "But watching you with that moose—" He paused, searching for words. "You reminded me of why I got into this work in the first place, not just to fix broken bodies, but to honor the wildness, the dignity of these creatures." Around the table, heads nodded in understanding, each person connecting the story to their own experiences of transformation and healing. The conversation that followed was rich with shared wisdom, laughter, and the kind of deep listening that creates bonds of true community. Spring arrived with its explosion of new growth, bulbs pushing through the last patches of snow in Gaby's garden, buds swelling on the branches of trees, birdsong filling the air from dawn until dusk. With the changing season came new projects and responsibilities, seedlings to tend, fresh herbs to harvest, preparations to create for the coming year's needs. Yet Gaby found herself drawn increasingly to work that connected her pharmacy practice with wildlife conservation, collaborating with Marcus on developing protocols for treating injured animals, using plant-based medicines alongside conventional approaches. Their partnership had deepened through the shared experience with Eldon, growing into a complementary merging of scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom that was yielding promising results. Word of their work spread through both professional channels and local networks, bringing inquiries from wildlife rehabilitators and veterinarians interested in integrating natural remedies into their practices. Gaby found herself sharing her knowledge more widely than ever before, teaching workshops on creating basic herbal preparations for animal care, writing articles for conservation newsletters, even speaking at a regional conference on wildlife medicine. These new roles sometimes took her away from the quiet routines she cherished, yet they felt like a natural evolution of her life's work, an opportunity to extend the healing she had always offered to a broader circle. Through it all, the memory of Eldon remained a touchstone, a reminder of what was possible when one approached healing with patience, respect, and a deep understanding of nature's own rhythms. One particularly fine day in late spring, Gaby decided to revisit the forest clearing where she had seen Eldon with his herd during the winter. The path was different, now muddy in places from spring rains, bordered by unfurling ferns and trilliums lifting their three-petaled blossoms toward the strengthening sun. As she walked, breathing in the rich scents of damp earth and growing things, she felt a profound contentment settle over her. Her life had always been guided by a love for the natural world and its healing gifts, but her experience with Eldon had deepened this connection, helping her articulate a vision of care that encompassed all living beings. Whether or not she would see any sign of him today didn't matter. His story had become part of her own, a thread woven into the fabric of her understanding of what it meant to be a healer. The clearing was transformed from her winter visit, the pond now liquid and reflecting the blue sky above, grasses and wildflowers beginning to reclaim the surrounding area, creating a vibrant tapestry of green, dotted with the colors of early blooms. Gaby settled on a fallen log at the edge of the open space, content to simply be present in this place for a while, watching the light play on the water's surface and listening to the symphony of life around her. Her mind quieted, her breathing slowed, and she felt herself melting into the landscape, becoming less observer and more participant in the unfolding moment. It was in this state of receptive awareness that she noticed movements in the trees across the clearing, the distinctive shapes of moose emerging from the forest shadows to drink from the pond's edge. Though she couldn't be certain at this distance whether Eldon was among them, it didn't matter. The sight filled her with joy nonetheless, a confirmation of the continuity of life, the cycles of nature that persisted regardless of human intervention or observation. These magnificent animals belonged here in a way she could only partially share, their lives interwoven with the forest in an ancient relationship that predated human presence. As she watched them move with surprising grace despite their bulk, Gaby felt a swell of gratitude for having been allowed, however briefly, to participate in their world. The healing she had offered Eldon was a small thing in the grand scheme of the forest's life, yet it connected her to something vast and enduring, a current of vitality that flowed through all living things. As the afternoon light began to soften toward evening, Gaby finally rose from her log seat, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from stillness. The moose had long since disappeared back into the forest depths, leaving only their tracks in the mud at the pond's edge as evidence of their visit. Walking back along the forest path toward home, Gaby's mind was clear, her heart full. The story of Eldon had changed her in ways she was still discovering, opening new paths for her work and deepening her already profound connection to the natural world. Whatever the future held, new animals to heal, new remedies to develop, new understandings to incorporate into her practice, she would approach it with the same patience, respect, and loving attention she had offered to a wounded moose on an autumn evening that now seemed both recent and distant, a moment out of time that had somehow expanded to encompass all that followed. Reaching the edge of her property as twilight began to fall, Gaby paused to look back at the darkening forest silhouette against the fading sky. Somewhere in those depths, Eldon was living his moose life, perhaps with a family of his own one day, carrying the healed scar as a reminder of his time in human care, but otherwise fully restored to his wild nature. There was profound rightness in this knowledge, a completion of the circle that had begun with finding him injured and afraid by the roadside. This was the true measure of healing, not creating dependence but enabling independence, not imposing human will but supporting natural processes, not claiming ownership but freely offering care without expectation of return. In this understanding, Gaby found the deepest satisfaction of her life's work, a quiet joy that would sustain her through all the seasons to come.